Okay, hello and welcome to Happy Hours. It's with me, Eileen Cook, and I'm hanging out tonight with Jenny. And we're going to talk all things writing today, which is November 20th in the evening. So it's a quiet night. We had, I think, 12 or 14 people this morning, and then now this evening, it's you and I hanging out. So I should have poured wine. That was my mistake.
Take a minute.
So I have some stuff I wanted to talk about, but did you have something in particular you wanted to tackle? Because you have me all to your lonesome.
Um, no, let's roll with it. I'm still getting like used to all these office hours and stuff and what I can learn. And I might think of something for my specific book, but I'm just sponging right now.
Well, let us sponge. So I am talking motivation. So where that comes from is one, I'm working on a nonfiction book that's all about developing characters, and I'm doing a section on motivation. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about it. And kind of everyone knows that their character needs to be motivated. And there's the wonderful book by Deborah Dixon called Goal, Motivation, Conflict. Or sometimes people will hear the term GMC. And that is the idea that every character has to have a goal. They have to have a reason to want that goal. That's your motivation. And then something gets in the way of them getting the goal, conflict. So that is the idea that absolutely everybody has those things in their story. So I've been kind of focusing and paying a lot of attention to motivation. And one of the things that I have always known is you've got to give your character really good motivation, because if you do your job right, you're going to make it really hard for them to get the thing that they want. So if I say,
See me look away, sorry.
That's fine, look away. And I like Natasha's changed seats. So we had like where she was in the morning, and now we have an evening view with a little sunflower. So glass of wine. I love Natasha. That is the kind of office hours we all should be having. And if I didn't have to get into my car and drive to meet people for dinner, and pie. There's pie and wine. And I'm doing this all wrong with my sad glass of water because I'm going to dinner after this. So we know they have to have a motivation, and we know we need the motivation because they have to want the goal really badly. If they don't want the goal really badly, then they would stop. That's what sane people do. So if we say, my character's goal is to open a bakery, and then we're going to make it hard on her to open that bakery because we're going to throw all these things at her. We're going to throw a city council that's trying to block her from having the bakery. We're going to throw in some like sort of horrible landlord who's trying to stop her, maybe a sister who doesn't want her to open a bakery, and then we're those kinds of people, we're those bitches. So we're going to burn that bakery down like while it's being built. So if we did that to any normal person, at some point someone says, screw it, I'm not opening a bakery. Like clearly the universe does not want me to open that bakery. So the question becomes, why would a character continue to do something? Why would they keep pushing towards a goal when we're going to go out of our way as authors to make it as hard as possible for them to get that goal? So they have to be really well motivated. So I've always kind of known that instinctively, and I've always sort of asked myself the question, like, why does my character want this thing? But that was kind of where I tended to stop for a long time. So in sort of thinking about it more recently, a few things have sort of come to my awareness around it, which is that motivation can do kind of some double duty with things. So it can sort of reveal more about your character. So it can reveal things about their values, about what's important to them. It can reveal things about their insecurities. It can provide you with a reason and an excuse to get into certain backstory issues. So if we go back to our same bakery situation, and I say, here we are, and I want to open this bakery, and I want to do it, first off, because of my mother owned a bakery. And, it was her lifelong dream, and her grandmother owned the bakery before that. And my great-great-grandmother owned a bakery before that. And they were thrust out of their country, and we were refugees. And so it is my dream to open my bakery here in Canada. I'm a refugee from the States. And so I am now here in Canada, and I am going to open my own bakery and fulfill the dreams of my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother to have a bakery here. And so I will persevere through a lot of things to open that bakery. So now it means more because of that. I can also add insecurities, right? So I can layer in a whole big thing around the idea that I never really felt like I had my mother's approval. And I was a screw up as a teenager. I got pregnant really young. I did all these things. I now have this chance to fulfill her dream. And if I build a bakery, then I will get my mother's approval, which is what I've never felt that I had. So by kind of digging into all those motivations, one, I'm giving myself a really good reason to keep building this bakery when everything is going against me to do it. And I'm telling you about my backstory. You're hearing more about it. You're getting to know all those kinds of things about me. You know my insecurities. You know I have this. So you are going to realize as the reader, like, I may need to get past this need for my mother's approval at some point, which may change and shift my motivation. Might start that I'm motivated because I want to do it for my mom. And then at some point it becomes about doing it for myself. And what you can also see, hopefully, if you were moved to tears by my American refugee in Canada bakery story, is that you're building empathy potentially for the character. Because now as the reader, I understand why you want that bakery, and I kind of now want you to have it too. So I am now becoming increasingly invested in your obtaining that bakery. And that's when you get the person cheering for the character to reach that particular goal. So you can start to see that it's more than just giving them a good reason to stick with it. It starts layering in all those things. And then you can also do this on your characters on the other side. So if we start talking about your villain or your antagonist, and if you want someone to know that they are not necessarily the good guy, so I want to open a bakery and so does my sister. And so we're fighting about which one of us is going to open this bakery. If she wants to open it because she wants to drive someone else out of business and it's about making money, and I'm going to short mom and grandma's recipes. I'm not going to use real butter because no one cares how those things taste anyway. And it's all about all of a sudden the reader's like, oh, well, so she's not the good person, right? If the motivation is on this other side, then we are revealing character and kind of hinting at, and that's not very hinty, that was pretty broad strokes, so sorry about that. But we're kind of getting really clear, like, this is the person you're cheering for, this is the person that you're not cheering for. Now, sometimes motivation is crystal clear because it's a life or death situation. So an asteroid is going to hit the Earth unless I, who am somehow uniquely qualified to fix it. I am Bruce Willis, and I can operate a drilling machine from a very bad movie, which I think was called Deep Impact, but I might be forgetting. I might have been blocking that horror out. So I am the only one who has the unique mining experience to, fly up to this asteroid, drill into it, and then blow it up. People will get life or death motivation. It's really crystal clear. What's important to remember is that if you're not writing some kind of action, adventure, stakes, life and death kind of thing, it just has to feel like life or death to the character. So if you're writing a murder mystery, hypothetically, say anyone in the room might be doing that, Natasha, it's always understandable that the detective is going to want to stop a murderer. That's a life or death stakes, particularly if there's an expectation that this person might murder more people, which you'll often see in mysteries where it's that increasing body count as the story goes along. But there's often some kind of additional reason that motivates the detective. So sometimes this reminds them of a case that they didn't solve, that they have never forgiven themselves for. Or there's something else that's potentially at stake. And that's where I think even when it's a big life or death circumstances, people will always buy into that. We get that. We understand that. We want the character to survive, so we'll cheer them on. But if you look at even, again, something as shallow as, and I'm so sorry if someone's like this huge Bruce Willis fan. Like, I like him too, don't get me wrong. But if we look at something like Deep Impact, which, let's be honest, is not known for deep characterization, the fact that the earth is going to blow up is bad. But really, to a large degree, what drives the emotion in that story is the fact that the earth blowing up will kill his daughter, Liv Taylor, right? So she is the stand-in for humanity, because I think people have a hard time grasping a big story. And that's why, like, when you watch the evening news and we look at something like the California wildfires, which is horrific and awful, to drill down on that, they're often showing an individual story. So they have you seeing one person who talks about, and this was me just recently, this woman who found her dog in a shelter, and the dog had the little tiny burn paws and all this kind of stuff. And like, for me, that was that's what got me. That was the emotion. Like, I think obviously what's happening in California is horrible, and I'm moved, and have donated to the cause and all that kind of stuff. But when someone makes it personal, that's why it resonates. That's why there's all those programs around Feed the Children, where you get a picture of little Johnny, and probably not named Johnny, in some far-flung country. And, it's because I can conceptualize suffering for one person or for a family. But when it becomes, there's this widespread famine, it's so much and it's so overwhelming that we emotionally kind of check out. It's just too much to take in. And so we will back right out of that. So if you're putting your character in a situation where there's big life or death stakes, you are the only one who can save Middle Earth. You are the only one who can save planet Earth. Looking to see, can you find something like a cat or something that might, hypothetically speaking, that might for the reader be that stand-in for the bigger emotional payoff. And again, if you look at something like, we're going to try and save, I'm a police officer and there's someone who's planting bombs across the city, and then I find out there's one planted in a school, and we've got to defuse it, and we only have a minute, and that's not going to be enough time to evacuate the school. Those are big stakes. All the readers are going to be like, defuse that bastard, right? Like, they're going to be cheering me on. Now, if I add that my own kid goes to that school, it ups the stakes, because one, for me, now it means more. Obviously, hopefully I would feel bad if a school blew up in general, but if it's my kid that's in that school, it's going to make it harder for me to do my job, because I'm now emotionally invested in this. And two, for the reader, there's huge stakes that are involved in that. So kind of my lead in with all of this is, it's letting you reveal character. It's letting you up the tension with things. It's letting you show maybe who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. The next kind of point that it will do is it will increase tension. And again, if people have ever read Deb Dixon's book on goal, motivation, conflict, she talks about sort of conflict locks and these kinds of things where if I want something and you want something, and that's the same thing, and we both can't have that thing, then we are going to butt heads. And I sometimes, when I'm talking to people around sort of crafting stories, I talk about, you can have an antagonist where it's like, I'm a villain, mwah, ha, ha, ha. I am trying to keep you from that thing. But if I am another good guy who just also happens to want that thing, that's also a very valid and sometimes worse conflict. So if I'm writing a YA and I have a character who wants to win a scholarship to a prestigious dance academy in New York City, and I'm going to, since we're torturing mothers today, I'm going to make it all about the fact that my mother died of cancer when I was younger, and she was a dancer, and her dying words to me was, please, baby, you do it for me. You dance on that stage, and I'm going to be watching you, right? Because I'm writing a Hallmark movie, so we're going to make this a bit of a tearjerker, right? So everything is about, if I can get to New York, I can fulfill my mom's dreams for me. I can feel like she is at peace, and if I don't do so, I've given her lots of good motivations to do this. I have all kinds of ways to set up to make this difficult. So I'm going to twist my ankle and there's going to be some problem with music and all this kind of stuff. And if it comes down to me and one other dancer, and that other dancer is my arch nemesis who has, constantly worked against me, that's one book. But you can also write a really interesting and emotionally kind of fulfilling, satisfying story if the person on the other side of that is my best friend who also wants to win that scholarship for a really good reason. And there's only one scholarship. So it's not like we can have an ending where like, we'll split the money and get part-time jobs, Susan, and we'll live together in the Lower East Side. Like that's not going to be one of the options for an outcome. So that becomes a whole extra layer of tension around, I want this thing, but I also want my best friend to get this thing, and they both can't have that thing. And how is that going to work out? So another great benefit is tension. So my next little point, any questions so far? I feel like I blather on. Everyone's nodding. Okay. And I also just have to say, Jenny, I love because your cat's tail's just on the side. So I keep thinking it's like a tendril of your hair that's just like kind of coming out. It blends, right? Like it's just sort of this, there you go. No. Oh, I turned your mic off, Jenny. I'm sorry. There you go. What were you saying?
Now you can see that my curtains match Natasha's picture.
Oh, they do. Sort of like one big giant living room. You're all living together. A dormitory, and I just didn't know it. I feel a little hurt that I'm not invited.
And I'm in the blackout zone.
Yeah. Lisa's just living in the dark, so that's all right. She's under the desk.
It's called being in an office.
Or it's that,
The same thing, living in the dark, yep.
That also works. All right, so we sort of talked about motivation, and so I just, I talked about life or death, but this is my call out because you guys know I'm a bit of a psychology junkie, and I'm always sort of thinking about that, is you can take a look at something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a place to sort of think about motivation. So at your very base are survival needs. So if your character does not have things like air, food, water, those are going to be the primary motivator for them in a story. So that's going to be, and it kind of ladders up. From there comes safety and security. And up from there it becomes, sort of relationships with others. And then up from there is sort of personal things. And then at the very highest level is sort of self-actualization. So you can sort of start to think about what it is. And there's not one that is better than another. So for clarity, it's not like safety is the best need that someone could be working for. That's something like, for example, Katniss is doing in the Hunger Games, is basic survival kinds of things. It's just a way of sort of understanding what it is that they're dealing with. But someone is not going to be thinking about, I really need to believe more in myself. And, my mom beat me down for all those years about this bakery, and I let my sister beat me around. No one's going to be thinking that if what's actually happening is the bakery is on fire and for some reason I'm tied to the oven. Like that is not the time to be having that consideration. The immediate thing is going to be get the hell out of the bakery. And then you can go back to dealing with more of those personal needs. Again, I think it's just, important to cycle back. It does not have to be life or death. And I think a lot of us sometimes will default to that because it's high stakes. So it feels very immediate and urgent. It just has to feel like high stakes. And again, I write a lot of YA, and the beauty of writing YA is as a teen, one thing that you are woefully lacking is perspective. So things feel like high stakes. So it becomes that thing of, if insert name of dreamy boy here does not, or dreamy girl, I'm open, insert name of dreamy crush here does not ask me to the dance, or if they break up with me, I will die. I will not, in fact, survive this breakup. When you're older, you might still have some of those same feelings, but you probably, hopefully, have a bit more perspective. So you have the sense of, I'm going to survive this thing. But it can still feel like life or death. So if you're writing a women's fiction novel and the character is going through a divorce, what about that? What is dying in her life that she will not get back? So she will survive. She probably knows that she's going to survive through the divorce, but there are going to be things that are dying for her, right? And that might be my sense of who I am as a wife, or it might be some material things, right? Like I will lose my home. I will have to move. I will have to go back to work if I've been a stay-at-home mom. And that means my image of who I am as a mom is dying, even if I myself am not dying. Now, if you're writing YA, it just feels like you're dying. So you can just go straight to those same emotions. Lisa, you had a question.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I'm bouncing as you're talking. So I just wanted to know if I could bounce an idea.
Of course.
Is like my current nano novel is I've got a character who's put her sister at risk. So there's this kind of, it's affecting her self-esteem, knowing that she's done this, and it's affecting the belongingness and love needs. I'm also noticing that the character is starting to go into the place where they're dipping into safety needs. So they're giving up, sacrificing their own safety as they go deeper into trying to help the situation. And I'm just wondering if that's a normal thing that happens in a story as the character starts to sacrifice some needs for others and starts to play that kind of game in that hierarchy of needs.
And I do think that happens. So I'm guessing they got their sister into danger without intending to. So they didn't put their sister at risk.
No,
like
not
purpose.
Deliberately. No.
Okay. So, and I'm going to divide this into two parts because I think it's kind of fun to play with. One part which will be helpful for you, Lisa, and one part which will not. So we'll do helpful first. So I think that's really interesting because she's put her sister at risk by accident. And as you pointed out, that's risking, relationship with sister and all those kinds of things. And also fundamentally, how do I feel about myself that I have done that thing? And I don't feel good about that. So I'm going to do that. So I will then risk myself to save my sister, which is a more altruistic thing. So we can see that as partially character growth. So some of that may be this person, I'm willing to do this. And people do that. You see people do that, not maybe as often as we would like, but where we will put our own needs or something on the back burner to achieve a higher good. So, and I'm going to go way over the top, but my sister's in a building with a bomb in it. And they're all like, we've got to get out. There's no hope anymore. Like there's not enough time. And it's like, well, I'm going to put myself at risk because I will do anything to save my sister. Part of that might also be one thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, which is unearthed motivation, I guess I would call it. And I just made that term up. I'm not even sure it's the right one, but it would be unknown motivation. So in your case, I'm wanting to save my sister because I love her. That's a motivation I might know and I might acknowledge, but there might be things going on that I don't acknowledge. So for example, I am partly saving my sister because if I don't, then something is going to repel back at me. Like I'm trying to become the next US president. And so I think that, if people find out I didn't try to save my sister, I'll never have a chance of getting elected. And I may not want to admit that to myself, but that may also be driving part of my motivation. And sometimes that unknown motivation can be at conflict. So this morning, I think it was Leslie was talking about a character that was a ghost who is motivated to help his still living wife find love again, right? And motivations for that is, I love my wife. I want my wife to be happy. There also may be some things that are not as nice to admit about ourselves, but we want to be the kind of person who would do that. Like we want to be that person who is like, I want you to love again, right? So we want to see that as kind of a natural thing. But there may be some also unearthed motivation around, I don't actually want her to find someone else because that means she's moved on. And, would it kill the woman to grieve a little bit longer before she gets happy? Like, I don't think so. And if she never gets over me, that says something about me that makes me kind of maybe feel like I'm the kind of person you just don't get over. And that may be motivation that the character may not be willing to admit to themselves. And that really comes, if anyone has ever taken a workshop with Don Moss, he often says, what is it that your character wants most? Write that thing down. And then what is the opposite of that thing? And how can your character potentially want both of those things? So the prime example that I often give is how many people might like to lose, 5 or 10 pounds or be a little bit fitter. Most people will raise their hands. Yeah, that would be great. So is it that you don't understand how to do that? And most of us do. We understand it means less carbs, exercising more, watching what we, it's not that we're lacking the information. So given that, then why aren't we all super thin and fit? And that's because we also want the cookie, right? So we want the cookie and we want being thin, and we cannot necessarily have both of those things depending on how many cookies are in play in any given situation. So the question is, does your character recognize maybe that back end of the opposite? And I think I've always taken it when I've done the exercise with Don Moss around that the character knew that thing. So they knew that they wanted to be fit, and they knew they also wanted the cookie, and those two things were at war with themselves. But I think it's sometimes interesting to recognize that your character may not be aware of that second side, because it means admitting to yourself, which is sometimes unpleasant, that maybe your motivations aren't always as pure as we like to think we are. I'm a big believer, and I've been talking a lot recently about the narrative that we tell ourselves. So we're constantly telling ourselves a story, right? So this is who I am. This is the kind of person that I am. And, to get all counselory on you, if you're constantly telling a narrative of like, I'm not that interesting of a person, people don't like me that much, I'm not really good at anything, those become self-fulfilling prophecies to some degree. They also become excuses to not necessarily do certain things. So we know that people are constantly telling themselves stories, right? And if something doesn't fit with that story, then we have to sort of rejig how we think about ourselves. So if we go back to this ghost character, which is, I am a loving, good man. I have cared for my wife all of our 40 years of being married. I put her first. I would, run into a burning building for that woman. I love her. I care for her. But I also, deep down in the dark night of my soul, I don't want her to fall in love with someone else. That hurts me. And I don't want to admit that, because what that means is saying, I don't want her to be happy, which is 100% what I do not think and want. So I think that's a great example of, I want my wife to find someone else and love again. And I don't want my wife to find someone else and love again. And I may not be willing to admit this hand, because that doesn't jive with who I see myself as. Did that help, Lisa, or did that just complicate things endlessly?
No, that's really cool. That's something I can look at to see if there's a hidden, what the hidden conflict would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go back to your example, and I'm going to take it in a way that is not helpful for your book, but might be helpful for someone else at some point, which is the idea of, if your character put their sister at risk deliberately. So I need to save the world. It's not clear how or why, but I need to save the world. And that means I may have to put you in a risky situation. And I am making the conscious choice that I feel that's better for the overall good. So for example, to make it a little bit more clear, my dad was in the military, and one of the things that he talked about, and I'm probably going to screw this up, so wherever you are, Dad, I'm sorry. But at Normandy, one of the things that they were doing was was called a belay, which is they were trying to place explosives underneath the bunkers that the Germans were in, because the Germans were up high on the battlefield in Normandy and basically strafing and just shooting up everyone who was trying to come ashore. So they have to blow up the bunkers. So the way that they were doing that is they were taking this pipe and it linked together. And the idea was we were going to shove this pipe up underneath those things, shoot an explosive up there, and blow up the bunker. Now, unfortunately, what that means is we have to get the pipe up there. So, and I'll just start sacrificing you in order that you kind of came in. So Jenny is going to get the pipe first. And she's going to come up out of the foxhole, and she's going to run as hard and fast as she can until she gets shot. And then I'm going to turn and I'm going to be like, Natasha, you're up. And Natasha's going to take the next piece of pipe, and she's going to run with the intention of connecting her piece of pipe to Jenny's piece of pipe and shoving it a little bit forward. And hopefully she's going to get as far as she can. But tragically for you, Natasha, you're also going to get hit. Next up is Lisa. Lisa's going to do that. And then again, finally Yuki, and with the idea that we're finally going to get there. So as the sergeant in control, I'm having to make a really hard decision, which is I am going to sacrifice people that I care about, that have been my band of sisters in this war to this point. Because if we do not take out this patch of beach, we cannot land the troops, we cannot win this battle, and this is a non-negotiable battle. And certainly when my dad would talk about this, he would become really tearful as someone who served in the military and served in Vietnam, and talking about having to make those kinds of choices. So another motivation is, for example, Lisa, if your character was putting their sister at risk because they made the determination, like, I don't want to do that, but I have to do that because there's something bigger, greater at risk here, and I need to put that forward. How do they feel about that? And then thinking about how do they come to terms with that, and how, again, might there be unearthed things like, the sister might be like, I might be like, sister, we're going to do this belay thing, and you've got to get up out of the foxhole and run with this pipe. And the sister might be like, you're choosing me because you want the glory. You want to be the one to save this, and you don't care if I die in this situation. I might be like, no, I have to pick you, because if I don't pick you, Natasha's going to say that I did it because you're my sister. So I have to choose you to show that there's no bias here. I'm really sorry about that, Lisa. I'm just made us sisters. So you have to go. I'm really tragically sorry, but I can't have Natasha and Jenny and everybody thinking that I wouldn't choose you, because then they'll never follow me later. But there may be unearthed things. There may be an element of, you've never done what I've said, and now you have to because we're in the military, or that a part of me does want to be the one, like, no one thought that we could get this piece of the beach, and if I get it, then I'm, going to have all this stuff. And yeah, I do want it for all the right reasons, but there might be some niggling negative reasons that I may not be 100% ready and willing to admit to myself. So I think that's sort of a really interesting field to sort of dig around in, that I myself hadn't been playing with. I had always played with motivation on that first level, like, this is what they want, they know what they want, and they're going after that thing, even if they want conflicting things. And for me, kind of the new thing that I'm thinking about is, what is it they want? What might be other things that they want that they're not willing or not yet able or mature enough or capable of realizing is a part of that? Because I think that digs into the conflict. I actually have notes. Believe it or not, I prepare for these things. I don't just talk randomly. I actually think about it before I do it. So some things to think about if you are writing, for example, a quieter novel that doesn't involve having to blow stuff up is there an area of your character's life where they're dissatisfied? Is there something that they're not happy with? It's a really good sort of journal prompt or, thing for them to sort of free write on. And then what's leading to that dissatisfaction? Like, what's going on for them around that? And some of that is, by writing these as journal entries, I think we're often getting into, again, the story that we tell ourselves about something. So what does that mean? And then lastly becomes what's keeping them from sort of taking action towards that area. So I'm going to go all the way back to the initial example of the character who wants to open the bakery. So the sense of dissatisfaction in my life might be that I'm in a dead-end job and that I, want to do the thing that I have this huge passion for, which is baked goods. And what led to that dissatisfaction might have to do with, again, the situation dealing with my mother, that I always felt like I couldn't make my mother happy. So it's been hard to sometimes kind of open this bakery and worry about taking on those risks and what that might be. And then there's all the conflicts, obviously, they're going to come up with that. And then what's keeping me from moving forward? And some of those things will be external things. So that's going to be the bakery fire and the angry, city council worker who won't give me a permit and my sister who's in the way. But what's getting in my way internally as well? And that is, again, sometimes where I might feel like I'm not good enough to do this. My mom always said that I wasn't good enough, and now she's being proven right again. So what is that kind of internal storyline, I think is really fun to dig around with. Because I think that gets into this ultimate thing that, and I love when I actually do this full circle, taking us back to chapter 1 of today's office hours, is motivation just lets you reveal so much more about the character. It tells us their values. It tells us what's important to them. It tells us a lot about their insecurities and their doubts about themselves. Because if we're motivated to do something, like what's stopping us from doing that thing? It'll let you increase the tension. Like you're just getting such bigger bang for buck if you don't just make it because. And I do see that sometimes in student work when you say like, well, why is the character doing this thing? And they'll give a plot reason. They'll say, well, she needs to do this thing so that this other thing can happen later. And that's actually an answer to why you need the character to do that thing. That is not an answer to why the character needs to do that thing. They have no idea that they are your pawn. So you have to give them a reason. If you've ever had the fortune or the enjoyment of working on any kind of play or movie set, I recently, not that long ago, did a scene that we were doing for Black Entertainment Television. So it was the first time for me that I've been on a movie set where I had actors actually acting out a scene from my book, which was amazing. And it was fantastic and so easy for me when the character who was playing Sophie, which is the main character, would say, like, why am I doing this, right? And I would be like, oh, and because I thought all about that, right? You have this reason and this reason, this is going on and so forth. But what I found fascinating is people who like basically were like guy number 2 in the scene, like your job is to walk from here to there so that we can see it's a busy scene. And the actor would be like, but what's my motivation? Why am I walking? And I'm like, you're walking there because it's a busy street scene, dude. Like there is no purpose. You don't even have a name in the book. You're like, it was a busy street. That's the scene that's in the book. But for the actor playing the part, he really wanted to have purpose and vision. Like I'm on my way to a date, and that compelled his performance around how he felt he was walking and talking and moving. I found it somewhat pretentious and irritating in the moment because I'm like, we're burning a lot of money while we're making this, so just walk down the street. But for him, it was important. So thinking when you're moving characters around, imagine them as actors who are going to want to know why they're there. And saying like, well, that character's there because my character needs to overhear something they're saying because it's a clue for the mystery is great. But just kind of even taking a second to think about why is the character having that conversation in the bar that's going to be overheard is important. Because it may just be a tiny thing that informs that or makes it more realistic, because especially if you're creating a scene where I'm overhearing Natasha say something that's going to be a huge clue for me to solve the mystery. If there's absolutely no reason for her to be having that conversation in the bar, it's going to feel off and weird to the reader. which will launch us into a whole other conversation, which we'll do another time, about coincidences if we haven't already. But, I'm going to want to have a reason. And if you can give me a reason why Natasha's there in the bar, it may show up on the page. It may only be in your head as the writer, but if you know it, it will make a huge difference. Those are my deep thoughts on a Tuesday night on motivation. Any questions about motivation, either in general or for your character? So if you have something. Jenny, did you have something?
So without boring everybody with too much detail, so my story is about a real historical character, and it's Sarah Winchester, who built the crazy Winchester Mystery House out in San Jose. Only I don't think she was crazy. I think she had purpose. So that purpose for her was that she wanted to leave a legacy behind, sort of in memory of her husband, but not the rifle. So she starts by building this house, and it ties into the story better. But that legacy that she's shooting for changes over time. So her end driving, creating this legacy, the house isn't really what it ends up being in the end. Yeah. But does that bother people when there's this big thing that she spends a lot of time on and then fails and then goes on to something where she can succeed?
So I'm going to break down to a couple of different things. So one, which is, even if someone is doing something that is quote unquote crazy, mm-hmm. One of the key things that I came to understand as a counselor is that everyone's doing something for a good reason. Mm-hmm. Now, it might not be a good reason in retrospect. It might not be a good reason in the sober light of day. It might not be a good reason if you are mentally healthy or on your medication or any of those kinds of things that might drive a bad thing. But in the moment, at that time, you're making what you feel is the best decision. Mm-hmm. So she has a purpose and a motivation, and she is driving towards that. And as long as you, like, even just the two little things that you start talking about, the legacy and what does that legacy mean? And, for me, it's raising all kinds of interesting things like, why is that important? And what does she think if her husband's legacy is the gun? What does that mean for her? Like, what does it say about me that I've done this for my husband? Because there's an element of that. If her motivation changes, so she either can't get that thing, so something happens, it's going to kind of come down to, and John Truby talks about the difference between want and need. Mm-hmm. So she may not get what she wants, but she may get what she needs, which is, I was doing this, I was building this legacy, and I cannot finish this house for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But do I get the thing where I'm now at peace? Like, really what that was about is me feeling like I needed to leave my mark. Mm-hmm. So part of my mark was, I am the ultimate wife. I have built this testament to my husband. Therefore, I'm a good person and I have achieved something. Mm-hmm. If I still get that, even if it's not the house anymore, it's going to feel satisfying and like a win. Okay. If I don't get that need, what you're writing is a tragedy, which also works. It's just a sad ending, right? Which is, I'm pursuing something that I never actually obtain. And that's sad. That's a disappointing thing if you spend your life doing that kind of stuff. So Natasha, you asked, how do you deal with that in the story? And so is that the idea that I've overheard a conversation? Your mic's off, so I have no idea what you're saying.
Okay, I was trying to turn it off, but I was pressing on the wrong icon. No, I was talking about when earlier when you were talking about wanting two different things and, that are complete opposites, and that the character may or may not even know what the complete, realize they sort of desire the completely opposite thing. How do you deal with that in the story? How do you handle that? What are some options or suggestions? Or
so let's break that out around. I'm going to create a story where I am. I have always wanted to make partner in a law firm. Like, it's always been my dream to be a lawyer, and I have been working on that. I went to the top law schools. I was on the wrong side of town, so I had to work 16 different jobs to pay for law school, and I'm like trying to obtain partner status. So that is what I want. That's what's driving me in this book, is this achievement of that. And I have all kinds of reasons about my lousy childhood and all those kinds of things that are driving me to want to be a lawyer where I can truth, justice, and all those kinds of things. And then I have a secondary plot, which is I have a family and I have children. And parenting those kids when pursuing partner status is really, really hard. And so I am struggling with the fact, so let's do it two ways. One way is I know that, like, I know I want to be a mom. And so you have scenes where I'm in a meeting and I also want to attend my kids' Christmas play because they're going to be the sheep. And I'm, desperately wanting to get there. And the meeting was supposed to end at 2 and it's going late. And if I don't leave soon, I'm going to miss that appointment. And I'm having the automatic tension of having to choose between these two things that I want, which is I want to be the uber lawyer and show everyone in the law firm that I can kick some ass in this meeting. And I want to go see my kid as a sheep. And I can't do both of those things. So that might be one way where I'm showing it where I know it's what I want. The other would be if I'm not necessarily willing to admit that. Can you hear my dog crying for snacks? If you're wondering what that odd little whale sign is. Aww,
oh, you're so mean to your dogs.
I know. It's like a toddler. She can tell when I'm on the phone and she's like, now is the time to ask for things. So if I am, again, the same character and I want partner in the law firm and I'm doing all that, and I'm not willing to admit, which I think is a huge struggle for a lot of women, that I might not be able to have it all.
Okay.
So you might have a scene where I'm up till 2 a.m. sewing a sheep costume that the nanny can take to the thing, or I'm not even, like, I've paid someone to make the sheep costume and I'm going to pay the nanny to videotape it so I can watch the scene later. And there's something going on for me where there's that conflict, or another character is like, really, that's what you want to be doing? Or I'm feeling guilt, but I don't want to admit that I can't do it all, because that means I can't have both those things.
Okay, so what about the sister scenario where you might have to sacrifice your sister? And what if there's like, you want to be the person who like looks after your sister, but secretly you're the person who wants to be loved best by mom. And if your sister's dead, that's going to happen because your sister's not there anymore. Like, I mean, how, like, are you suggesting, like, just let it ride along in the story and not resolve it? Because, like, I'm thinking in terms of resolution, or if it.
Well, and some things I don't think are resolved. So I think sometimes it's sometimes admitting to ourselves that we have those things, right?
Okay.
So one resolution with that might be the awareness of, like, holy shit, I didn't want to think that of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I might have been willing to sacrifice myself.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Right. And I need to do better than that. Or if we take the ghost example, I can foresee an ending where the ghost is like, holy shit, I said I wanted her to find love, but I've been doing stuff to block that. And that's me. And I've got to rise above that, because some of that's personal growth, right? That's sometimes realizing, the truth is we're all a mishmash of good and bad things, and we all want to be good, but sometimes the most important thing you can do is to recognize your own weakness and to realize, like, wow, I care way too much about what people think, or wow, my mom's approval is way more important than it should be to me, to the point that apparently I'm willing to kill my sister over it. So, and then recognizing that and kind of then acknowledging it. And you may still always have an element of that. Like, I think we're all trying to evolve, and, where some of us are doing more or less better at that, depending on how things are going for you. But it's a constant battle. So for that, I might show that the character suddenly has an awareness that they were taking a risk at a reason that they didn't necessarily need to take it.
Okay. Thank you.
So that might be a thing there. All right. Well, that actually takes us to 6 o'clock. So I am going to thank everybody. I'm going to let everyone know again, because there was some talk about changing office hours. I am going to change my office hours. You'll see it in the calendar. and it might have been going bloop, bloop, bloop because I'm technically somewhat challenged. So it took me about 22 tries to change that in the calendar. So next week is exactly the same. So it'll be Tuesday morning and Tuesday evening, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. But starting the first week of December, it will be Tuesdays at 5 p.m. and Wednesdays at 9 a.m., just to kind of put it on 2 different days. So that will be changing up in December, and there will be reminders in the newsletter and all that kind of stuff, but just giving you people a heads up. And otherwise, thank you. Thank you for sharing your cat and your wine and all the kinds of things with me. I'm going to go out for dinner and have my own glass of wine, and no cat, but a dog. All right, everybody. Have a great night, and I will see you around the Academy.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, kitty.
My